Aaliyah Carter moved silently through the polished corridors of Kingsley Tower, her cart of cleaning supplies the only companion in a building that seemed to breathe power even after midnight. She had grown used to invisibility, the way executives passed her during the day without truly seeing her, and at night she preferred the silence, the safety of blending into shadows. Tonight was supposed to be no different, until she noticed the private elevator doors at the end of the hall standing open, a quiet invitation to a floor she had never dared to touch. Logic told her to ignore it, to finish her shift and leave, but something stronger, a pull she could not explain, urged her forward. Before she could think, she stepped inside, the doors closing behind her with a soft sigh that felt almost fateful. When the elevator opened, the world shifted. The penthouse stretched wide before her, a palace of glass and dark stone floating above the city. Manhattan shimmered below, lights twinkling like restless stars, but her attention snapped to the tall figure framed against that ocean of brilliance. Malik Kingsley. The name was known everywhere. Heir to Kingsley Holdings. A man both feared and envied, ruthless in boardrooms, flawless in tailored suits. She froze, her pulse racing, realizing she had walked straight into his world uninvited. He turned, eyes locking onto her with a sharpness that pinned her in place. She expected coldness, disdain, the command to get out. Instead, his gaze burned with something else, dark and unreadable, like a storm carrying loneliness beneath its thunder. His presence filled the air, and Aaliyah struggled to breathe under the weight of it. "You shouldn't be here," Malik said, his voice low, rough, carrying authority and danger, yet not unkind. Her throat tightened. "I was cleaning," she answered quickly, as if those two words could explain her trespass. She took a step back, wanting to flee, but his focus didn't release her. He moved closer, his hand lifting, not to block her escape, but to steady her. His touch brushed her hand, warm and steady, and it startled her enough to freeze. His eyes flicked down, then up again, softer now, though still intense. "You're trembling," she swallowed, embarrassed at the truth exposed. "I'm not used to this," she whispered, his brow furrowed slightly. "Not used to what? Someone touching you, or someone actually seeing you?" The words pierced her defenses. She wanted to deny it, but honesty broke through in the faintest breath. Both. Something shifted in him then. The hardness she had heard about in rumors, the merciless edge of a man raised by power, faded, replaced by a tenderness she hadn't expected. He reached out, his thumb gliding along the line of her jaw, tracing her face as though it were a map of something he intended to study with care. The touch was reverent, cautious, as if she might shatter under it. "Then I need to be careful with you," he murmured, almost to himself, and the words vibrated through her, not as a warning but as a promise. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. His hand slipped away, but instead of dismissing her, he extended it fully now, palm open, a silent invitation that felt impossibly dangerous and impossibly safe at once. She stared at it, torn between the instinct to run and the hunger to step closer to whatever this was. And then, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, Aaliyah placed her hand in his. His fingers closed firmly around hers, strong yet secure, and the world tilted. In that moment she knew there was no going back. The invisible girl who once passed unnoticed through the halls had crossed a threshold into a story she could never escape, one written in fire and risk, with Malik Kingsley at its center. Malik guided Aaliyah deeper into the penthouse, his hand enveloping hers with a certainty that unnerved her and steadied her at the same time. The rooms they passed looked like works of art, sleek lines and dark walls accented with contemporary canvases, every surface whispering of wealth and control. She felt out of place, a night cleaner from the Bronx dragged into a world of marble and glass, yet she could not pull away. His presence anchored her as much as it unsettled her. They entered a vast living space where flames flickered low in a suspended fireplace, throwing a glow that painted the cityscape beyond the glass walls. Malik stopped, turning to face her fully. His eyes, so often described in business journals as sharp steel, now looked alive with something rawer, heavier, and Aaliyah felt her breath catch. She tried to speak, to offer some excuse to retreat, but the words lodged in her throat as his hand slid from hers only to rest at the curve of her waist. The heat of his touch sent shivers spiraling through her, leaving her both afraid and hungry for more. "You're shaking again," he said, his voice rough, lower now, softer than the ruthless edge she had heard about in whispers. "I'm not used to this," she whispered back, avoiding his eyes. "Not used to someone touching you," he pressed gently, "or to someone actually seeing you." Her eyes rose to meet his then, unable to look away. The truth escaped before she could hide it. Both. His gaze softened instantly, the sharpness fading into something reverent. He raised his other hand slowly, touching her face with the back of his fingers, tracing the line of her jaw as if memorizing her. It was not possession, it was recognition. She had never known what it felt like to be held in someone's eyes that way, as though her existence had weight and meaning. "Then I'll be careful with you," he said, more to himself than to her, but she heard it all the same, and her chest tightened with an emotion she didn't want to name. For a moment, the silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the city beneath them. Then Malik stepped back slightly, his hand slipping from her jaw only to extend fully between them. "Come with me," he said, not commanding but offering. She stared at his hand, her pulse wild. She knew if she accepted, there would be no undoing it. Fear warred with something deeper. Curiosity, longing, the mirrored loneliness she saw in his eyes. And in the end, that pull was stronger. She placed her hand into his once again, and he closed his fingers around hers firmly, as if sealing a pact. He led her through another hallway, this one darker, lined with shadows and art that looked more like declarations than decoration. At the end stood a bedroom unlike any space she had ever seen, vast and architectural, the bed draped in gray sheets that seemed far too fine for human touch. The walls were pure glass, offering a horizon of light stretching endlessly across Manhattan, the city glowing like an ocean of stars. Aaliyah halted at the threshold, heart pounding, chest tight. She had never allowed herself to be seen this way, vulnerable, exposed, on the edge of stepping into a moment that would change everything. Malik stopped too, turning toward her, and the way he looked at her stripped the last layer of her defenses. "You can leave any time," he said steadily, voice controlled, eyes unwavering. "I won't stop you. I won't judge you." Her breath trembled as she met his gaze. There was no mockery there, no cruelty, only sincerity and a quiet promise that terrified her more than any danger could, because it was real. And in that instant, she knew she was already too far gone to turn back. The night after their first meeting should have faded into a dream, something Aaliyah could tuck away as a mistake and forget. But it didn't. Every time she returned to Kingsley Tower for her shift, she felt his presence like an invisible thread pulling at her. And sometimes, when she least expected it, Malik Kingsley appeared silent and unshakable, as though he had been waiting. It began with glances in the quiet cafeteria at dawn, where the night staff finished their shifts and the world outside stirred awake. Aaliyah would sit at a corner table with a paper cup of coffee, convincing herself she was invisible, until Malik's tall frame appeared in the doorway. He would not approach immediately. He simply watched her with that same unrelenting gaze, making it clear that he noticed her in a way no one else did. And when he finally came closer, when his hand brushed hers on the table or his voice murmured her name, she felt as though the ground shifted beneath her. Then came the elevator rides, the moments when the doors slid closed and they were alone in a capsule of silence. Malik would stand too near, his arm brushing against hers, his scent surrounding her like smoke and steel. He rarely spoke, but the tension pressed against her skin, building until even the short journey between floors felt like an eternity, charged with unspoken promises. One night she found herself alone in one of the service corridors, gathering supplies when Malik appeared as though conjured from the shadows. His hand caught hers before she could retreat, firm but not harsh, pulling her closer. His eyes burned with the same loneliness she had seen in the penthouse, but now it was sharper. Edged with hunger he no longer tried to hide. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, his breath close enough to brush her cheek. "I'm not avoiding," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Yes, you are," Malik answered, his thumb tracing across her knuckles, making it impossible for her to lie. "But it doesn't matter. I can't stop thinking about you." The admission stole her breath. He was Malik Kingsley, a man who commanded empires, confessing something that sounded more like weakness than power. And yet when he leaned closer, when his lips hovered just above hers, she realized she wasn't afraid. She wanted this, wanted him. Even though she knew every step deeper into his world would carry consequences she wasn't prepared for. When their lips met, it wasn't rushed like she had feared. His kiss was slow, deliberate, as though he had been holding himself back for too long. Heat spread through her, and before she could think, Her arms lifted around his neck, holding on to the danger she should have fled. He kissed her again, deeper, anchoring her to him, until she felt as though she were dissolving into the moment. The world outside still existed, the city, the danger of discovery, the differences between them, but here, in the quiet corners of Kingsley Tower, they created their own reality, a place built of glances, stolen touches, and whispers too fragile to survive daylight. Aaliyah knew she should run, but every time Malik appeared, every time his hand found hers, she found herself staying. And though she tried to convince herself it was only a fleeting pull, deep down she already knew the truth. She was caught, and there was no turning back. The days blurred together after that, each shift heavy with the weight of unspoken desire. Aaliyah tried to lose herself in her work, scrubbing floors, polishing glass, convincing herself she was nothing more than a shadow in Kingsley Tower. But shadows don't tremble at the sound of a man's footsteps, and hers always did when Malik was near. She could feel him before she saw him, that sharp current in the air that announced his presence, and every time, her resolve cracked just a little more. It happened late one night when she slipped into one of the executive bathrooms, the kind polished marble and soft lighting made to impress visiting clients. She had only meant to wash her hands, but when she looked up, Malik's reflection appeared behind her in the mirror. He was silent, his tall frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes fixed on her with the kind of focus that made the rest of the world vanish. Her breath caught. "You shouldn't sneak up on people." "I wasn't sneaking," Malik said quietly, stepping inside and closing the door behind him with a soft click. "I was looking for you." Her pulse jumped. She turned toward him, trying to gather strength. "Why?" He studied her with that same relentless intensity, as if he were peeling back every defense she thought she had. "Because I can't stop," he said finally, voice low and rough. "I can't stop thinking about you, Aaliyah. Every hour, every corner of this building reminds me of you. It's madness, and yet I don't want it to end." The words struck her harder than she expected. Men like Malik didn't confess weakness. They didn't admit to obsession. And yet here he was, his control unraveling, not in fury, but in longing. "You don't mean that," she whispered, shaking her head, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I mean every word," he replied, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "You walk through these halls as though you're invisible, but to me you're all I see. You haunt me, Aaliyah." Her back pressed against the sink, trapped between his presence and her own confusion. "This isn't supposed to happen," she said, but her voice faltered when his hand lifted to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Then tell me to stop," he murmured, his thumb grazing her cheek, his eyes locked on hers. "Say the word and I'll walk out that door." "But if you don't?" His voice deepened, breaking into something raw. "Then you belong to me, even if it's only here in the shadows." She should have spoken, should have pushed him away, but her body betrayed her. Her heart thundered, her breath hitched, and her silence became an answer louder than words. Malik leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to resist. But when his lips met hers, she didn't resist at all. The kiss was fierce, edged with desperation, but beneath it she felt something tender, something that terrified her more than his power ever could. Because in that moment she realized he wasn't just claiming her. He was surrendering too. When they broke apart, her chest rose and fell rapidly, and his forehead rested against hers as if he couldn't let her go. "This isn't passing, Aaliyah," he whispered. "This is the beginning of something I can't undo, and I don't want to." Her hands gripped the marble sink for balance, torn between fear and the wild pull inside her chest. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this was dangerous, impossible, but the truth hung heavy between them. She wanted him just as much. The rhythm of their encounters became a dangerous melody, a song of stolen kisses in dark hallways and whispered promises behind locked doors. For Aaliyah, the pull was both unbearable and irresistible. Every time Malik touched her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. Yet every time she left him, guilt twisted inside her like a blade. She told herself she was losing control, but deep down she knew she had already surrendered. It was on one of those restless nights, while finishing her rounds on the archive floor, that fate shifted everything. The archive was a place she rarely entered, a forgotten corridor filled with boxes and dusty files, the kind of space that carried the smell of paper and time. She moved quietly through it, pushing her cart, when one of the heavy boxes toppled from the shelf, spilling its contents across the floor. She bent down to gather the papers, muttering under her breath, But then her eyes froze on the words stamped across the top of a file. Langston House for Children. Her breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. The name was carved into her childhood, etched into nightmares she could never escape. She turned the page and her heart dropped. Inside were reports, photographs, records, children's names listed like inventory, with notes scrawled in margins. Experiments, funding logs, medical jargon she barely understood but recognized as something cold and cruel. And at the bottom of one page, bold and undeniable, was the signature of the Kingsley Family Foundation. Her stomach knotted as the world tilted. Malik's family, his name, his blood tied to the very place that had stolen her childhood. Memories crashed back with brutal force, the sterile hallways, the whispers of adults treating children like subjects instead of souls, the sleepless nights spent wondering why her life had been reduced to numbers and codes. And now here in her hands lay the proof. Tears blurred her vision, anger mixing with grief until she could hardly breathe. She shoved the papers back into the box, her chest heaving. But when she turned to leave, she nearly collided with him. Malik stood in the doorway, his broad frame shadowing the light, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "Aaliyah," he said, his voice low. "Dangerous. What are you doing here?" She clutched the file against her chest as though it might shield her. "I could ask you the same thing." His gaze dropped to the folder and realization flickered across his face. He stepped closer, but she recoiled. "Where did you get that?" "It fell," she said, her voice shaking but her anger rising. "I was cleaning, Malik. I wasn't looking for secrets. But maybe your family left too many to hide." She shoved the file at him, her eyes blazing. "You knew?" "I didn't," he said immediately, his tone sharp, desperate. He reached for her, but she pulled back, her body trembling with fury. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her throat tight. This is my childhood. Do you understand? These walls, these records, they're my life. And your family signed their name to it like it was business." Malik's jaw tightened, his chest heaving as though the words had struck him physically. He looked down at the file in his hands, flipping through pages as though each one cut deeper than the last. His silence made her want to scream. "Say something," she demanded, tears stinging her eyes. "Tell me why. Tell me how I'm supposed to stand here and look at you when every time I do, I see the people who destroyed me." Finally, he lifted his eyes, and for the first time, she saw not power, not control, but devastation. "I swear to you, Aaliyah," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I never wanted this. If this is true, then my family built its empire on blood, and I will burn every piece of it to the ground before I let it touch you again." But his vow did not erase the truth that lay between them. The air thickened, heavy with betrayal and longing, and for the first time since their dangerous dance began, Aaliyah wished she had never stepped into that elevator, because now love was tangled with hate, and nothing could ever be the same. The file still trembled in Aaliyah's hands, its weight crushing her as if every page carried another stone from her past. Malik stood inches away, his chest rising and falling, the storm in his eyes threatening to break loose. For once, he did not look like the ruthless heir the world admired. He looked like a man stripped bare, caught between the sins of his bloodline and the fragile thread of trust that held him to her. "You don't understand what this means to me," Aaliyah said, her voice sharp, trembling. "Every nightmare I've had since I was a child is in these papers. Every sleepless night, every whisper in those cold hallways, they're here. Numbers, experiments, children like me treated like objects. And all of it funded by your family." Her throat burned, but she didn't stop. "Every time I let you touch me, every time I let myself believe this could be real, I was betraying that little girl who suffered because of people like you." Malik flinched, as if her words were knives. He reached out, but she recoiled, pressing her back against the wall. His hand froze midair, trembling before it fell uselessly to his side. "Aaliyah," he said hoarsely, "please look at me. I swear to you I didn't know. My father, he kept the foundation locked behind a curtain of lies. I thought it was charity, a legacy of good. I had no idea it was built on suffering. If I had known..." His voice cracked. "If I had known, I would have burned it down myself." Her eyes brimmed with tears, fury clashing with longing. "But you carry the name Malik Kingsley. Every letter of it feels like a chain around my neck. And when I look at you, I don't just see you. I see the men who signed those files, the empire that treated us like experiments." He stepped closer, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Then take my name away. Strip me of it. I don't care. I don't want their legacy if it means losing you. I'll tear down every company, every building, every symbol my father ever built. I'll destroy it all if that's what it takes. Her breath shuddered, her hands clutching the file so tightly the edges cut into her skin. And what if it isn't enough? What if every time I let you near me I feel like I'm betraying the girl I used to be? His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with both rage and pleading. He took her face in his hands suddenly, forcing her to meet his gaze. Then let me help you honor her. Let me fight with you, not against you. I see you, Aaliyah, not as a victim, not as someone broken, but as the strongest person I have ever known. And I'm not letting you face this alone. Her tears spilled then, hot against his palms, but she couldn't bring herself to push him away. The part of her that hated him for what his family had done battled the part of her that ached for him, the part that had already fallen too deep. She turned her face slightly, just enough to escape his hold, and whispered, I don't know if I can forgive you for a bloodline you didn't choose. And I don't need forgiveness, Malik said firmly, his voice raw. I need you, just you, and I will fight every day to prove that I'm not him, that I'm not them. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything unsaid, until finally she pulled back from him, clutching the file to her chest like a shield. She couldn't trust him, not fully. Not yet. But walking away felt impossible, like tearing herself in half, and Malik knew it. The way he watched her, tormented, determined, unwilling to let her go, told her that whatever storm this was, it had only just begun. The city was still asleep when Aaliyah stepped onto the terrace of Kingsley Tower, the wind cutting sharp against her skin. She hadn't planned to come here, but something restless inside her wouldn't let her go home. She needed air, distance, space from the file that still sat like poison in her bag. Yet when she turned, she wasn't alone. Malik stood by the glass railing, his tall frame silhouetted against the paling horizon, as if he had been waiting for her all night. For a moment she considered retreating, but his voice found her before she could move. I thought you wouldn't come back. She swallowed, her pulse quickening. Neither did I. He turned, his eyes searching hers, raw and sleepless. I've started the investigation, he said, his voice carrying the weight of a promise. Every record, every file, every deal tied to the foundation, I'm tearing it apart. If my family's fortune was built on suffering, then I'll burn it all down until there's nothing left but ash. The intensity in his words sent a shiver through her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the man standing before her, but her scars whispered caution. She crossed her arms tightly. And then what? You think undoing the past will make it vanish? It won't give me back my childhood, Malik. It won't erase the years I spent wondering why I wasn't enough. His jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. He stepped toward her slowly, careful not to push too hard. I know I can't give you back what was stolen, but I can stand beside you while you carry it. I can make sure no one ever dares to touch you again. I can fight the monsters with you, even if one of them is my own father. Her breath trembled, caught between fury and the aching pull of his sincerity. She wanted to run, yet when he reached out and brushed his fingers against hers, she didn't pull away. Instead, she let him take her hand, his grip steady, grounding her against the storm inside. Why me? She whispered, her voice breaking. Out of everyone in your world, why the invisible girl with nothing but scars? He closed the distance between them, his forehead resting against hers. His voice was rough but certain. Because you're the only one who sees me. Not the air, not the name, just me. You're the first person who's ever looked past all of it. And now I can't imagine breathing without you. Her tears fell silently, the wind carrying them away as though the city itself bore witness. She hated him for what his family had done, but she loved him for the man he was becoming before her eyes. That contradiction burned inside her, fierce and unrelenting. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice almost lost in the rush of the wind. So am I, Malik confessed, tightening his hold on her hand. But fear doesn't mean we stop. It means we fight anyway. The first rays of dawn crept over the skyline, bathing them in gold as if the city itself demanded a choice. Aaliyah looked at Malik, saw the determination in his face, the vulnerability in his eyes, and for the first time since the file had fallen into her hands, she allowed herself to believe just a little that maybe he was worth the risk. She nodded faintly, her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was not desperate or stolen but deliberate. A vow. A choice. And in that moment, as the city woke beneath them, Two broken souls chose to stand together against the storm. The Kingsley penthouse boardroom was silent but charged, the kind of silence that carried more threat than words. Malik stood at the head of the long glass table, his jaw rigid, the morning light spilling over him like a spotlight in a theater. Across from him sat Reginald Kingsley Sr., his father, the patriarch who had built an empire of steel, finance, and control. Even in his 60s, Reggie's presence dominated the room. Sharp eyes, sharp tongue, and the kind of power that had crushed men without lifting a hand. On the polished surface of the table lay a folder of photographs. Aaliyah's face stared back from each one, caught walking out of Kingsley Tower at dawn, standing in the cafeteria, her hand brushing Malik's as they passed through the hallway. Evidence, proof. To his father, she was nothing more than a liability captured on glossy paper. "You've made a spectacle of yourself," Reggie said coldly, tapping a photo with one finger. "A janitor, Malik? Is this what you're risking the Kingsley name for? Our legacy, our empire, dragged into the gutter for a woman who cleans our floors?" Malik's fist tightened at his sides, but his voice remained controlled, even though anger burned beneath it. "Her name is Aaliyah, and she's worth more than everything this family owns." Reggie's lip curled, his laugh a bitter sound, spoken like a child. "You think this is about romance? It's about survival. You will not throw away generations of power for some—" He caught himself, but the disdain in his eyes finished the sentence. Malik stepped forward, his shadow falling across the photographs. "What you call power was built on suffering. Do you think I don't know now? Langston House, Project Dawnlight. I've seen the files. I know exactly what this empire was built on, and I refuse to inherit it." The elder Kingsley's expression darkened, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Watch your mouth, boy. Everything you have comes from me. From this name." "Then take it back," Malik shot back, his control cracking for the first time. "Take the name, the fortune, the company, because I don't want it if it means carrying your sins. I'd rather walk away with nothing and stand beside Aaliyah than sit here in a palace made of blood." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Reggie rose slowly from his chair, his height still imposing, his authority woven into every movement. He leaned forward, his face inches from his son's. "If you walk out of this room with her, you are no longer my heir. You will have nothing. Do you hear me?" "Nothing." Malik didn't flinch. His voice was steady, his eyes unwavering. "Then I'll start over. I don't need your empire. I don't need your name. I only need her." For the first time, his father's mask cracked, fury flashing like lightning. "You'll regret this," he spat, but Malik only turned away, gathering the photographs from the table and tearing them in half one by one, before dropping them at his father's feet. "Maybe," Malik said, his voice quiet but resolute, "but at least my regret will be mine. Not yours, not this family's, mine." Without another word, he walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the empire that had been his destiny since birth. For the first time in his life, Malik Kingsley felt free, and yet he knew freedom came with a cost. The Bronx was a different world from the glittering halls of Kingsley Tower. The cracked sidewalks, the hum of late-night traffic, the worn paint on Aaliyah's building, all of it grounded her, reminded her where she came from, who she was. It was her shield against the storm of emotions Malik had stirred in her life. Tonight she had tried to hide behind it, convincing herself that distance would help her breathe. But when the knock came at her door just past midnight, her heart knew before her mind did. She opened it, and there he was, Malik Kingsley, the man who had walked away from an empire, now standing in the narrow, dimly lit hallway of her walk-up, like he belonged nowhere else. His tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled, his eyes shadowed but unyielding. "You shouldn't be here," Aaliyah whispered, though her voice betrayed the tremor of something else. Hope. Fear, longing. "I had nowhere else to go," Malik said simply. His voice was rough, stripped of the polish it usually carried. "Not because I lost everything. Because I realized none of it mattered without you." Her throat tightened. "You gave up your name, your future, your father's empire. For me?" He shook his head. "Not for you, for us. For the chance to choose a life that isn't poisoned by lies. For the first time I chose for myself, and the only choice that made sense was you." Tears stung her eyes, but she fought them back, leaning against the doorframe for strength. "You don't know what it's like here, Malik. This isn't penthouses and chauffeurs. This is bills stacked on the counter, neighbors yelling through thin walls, and nights where heat doesn't work in the winter. You don't belong in my world. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against the chipped paint of her doorframe as if anchoring himself to it. Then let me belong. Let me stand with you here where life is real. I'm not afraid of broken walls or quiet streets. I'm afraid of losing you. The honesty in his voice unraveled her. Every defense she had built collapsed under the weight of his sincerity. She opened the door wider, letting him step inside. The small apartment suddenly felt fuller, warmer, though it carried none of the luxury he was used to. The couch was old, the curtains faded, but Malik looked at it as though it were a palace because it was hers. She turned to him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I don't know how to let you in without feeling like I'm betraying who I was. He closed the distance, his hands lifting to rest gently on her shoulders, grounding her. Then don't betray her. Honor her. Let her see that the girl who survived Langston House grew into the woman who made a man like me kneel at her door. You've already won battles most people couldn't imagine, Aaliyah. I just want to be the one who fights the rest with you. Her tears fell freely now, hot streaks down her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't hide them. Malik brushed them away with his thumbs, his touch careful, reverent, as though she was something sacred. When his lips found hers, it wasn't like the stolen kisses in the tower. It wasn't about secrecy or shadows. It was about choosing each other in the open. No matter how small or fragile the space around them was, she kissed him back, her arms finally releasing their hold on her own body to wrap around him instead. They stayed like that for a long moment, the city outside humming through the thin walls, their hearts steadying against each other. And when they finally pulled apart, Malik whispered against her hair, I don't need the empire. I only need this, you, us. And for the first time since she had found those cursed files, Aaliyah allowed herself to believe he meant it. The days that followed were not the fairy tale Aaliyah secretly wished for. Malik stayed with her in the Bronx apartment more often than not, stripped of chauffeurs and penthouse views, his life reduced to the simplicity of her world. He didn't complain about the creaking pipes, the flickering light in the hallway, or the sounds of neighbors arguing through the thin walls. If anything, he seemed more alive here than in the glass fortress he had abandoned. But for Aaliyah, the shadows of the past did not vanish. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of cold white hallways and the echo of children's cries from Langston House. She would wake at 3 a.m, breathless, shaking, and though Malik always pulled her into his arms, pressing kisses to her hair and murmuring that she was safe, the ghosts remained. Some nights she believed them. Other nights she pulled away, unable to let even him quiet the memories. Malik carried his own battles. The headlines were relentless. Kingsley heir rejects fortune, disgraced son chooses love over legacy. His father made good on his promise. Malik was cut out of the empire completely. The accounts were frozen, the privileges gone. For the first time in his life, he was living without the safety net of wealth. And though he didn't flinch outwardly, Aaliyah saw the weight he carried in his tired eyes. One evening, they stood on her rooftop, the city stretching endlessly before them. Not from a penthouse this time, but from a cracked concrete ledge where rusted railings rattled in the wind. Malik leaned against the wall beside her, his hand brushing hers but not holding it, giving her space. You're quiet, he said softly. She exhaled, staring at the skyline. I don't know how to do this. Part of me wants to believe in us, but another part, every time I close my eyes, I see what your family did to mine. I feel like I'm betraying that little girl inside me when I let myself love you. Malik's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. Then don't betray her. Fight for her, and let me fight with you. I don't care how long it takes. If you need space, I'll wait. If you need proof, I'll spend every day giving it to you. But don't shut me out, Aaliyah, not now, not after everything we've already survived. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't realized she was holding back. What if this isn't enough? What if love can't erase what's been done? He finally turned to her, his hand finding hers with deliberate care. Then love won't erase it. It will carry it. We'll carry it. Together. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of the city below, the noise of lives that would never know their story. Aaliyah looked at Malik and saw not the ruthless heir who once stood above the world, but the man who had torn himself from his own bloodline to stand beside her. He wasn't perfect. Neither was she. But maybe perfection had never been the point. Her grip on his hand tightened. I'm still afraid, she whispered. So am I, he admitted, his voice rough with honesty. but I'd rather be afraid with you than fearless without you. And for the first time, she let herself believe that fear didn't have to mean the end. It could mean a beginning. They leaned into each other then, not with the urgency of stolen moments, but with the steady resolve of two people who knew the storms weren't over, who knew the world would never make it easy, but who had chosen, despite everything, to face it together. The girl who once lived invisible in shadows and the man who once ruled from glass towers now stood side by side, scarred, imperfect but unbroken. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one truth remained clear. Love had not saved them, but it had given them the strength to fight. And that, Aaliyah realized as Malik's arms wrapped around her under the fading sky, was enough.